Hey, this week we're talking about monitors, HDMI, and how they work under Linux. There's news about the HDMI 2.1 standard, variable refresh rate under Gnome and under HDMI for that matter, and Pingora, maybe the Nginx killer? All kinds of good stuff. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 141, recorded Saturday, March 2nd. Gnome goes VRRRR. Hey everybody, welcome. It is Saturday. You know what that means. It's time for Linux. It's time for the Untitled Linux Show. And of course, it's not just me. We've got the full cadre, all four of us all together. And with this group, maybe I'm sorry. I don't know, but hey, it's going to be fun either way. And we're going to dive right into it. And we're going to dive into it. We're going to let Ken take the first story about one of my tools that I really like to use that is really weird that I'm the one that likes to use it. And Ken will tell you about it, and then I'll tell you why. If you can't figure it out yourself, you can figure out why that it's weird that I like it so much. But Ken, take it away.
Well, it's one of my go-to software for managing my drive partition. We're talking about, of course, Gparted. And this week we hear from Marius Nestor that Gparted 1.6 was released as a maintenance update that addresses several bugs to improve support for various file systems. This release includes a fix for a crash that occurred when dealing with the 0000-0000 exFAT UUID. Try saying that 3 times fast. A change that would have stopped Gparted from forcing a 1 megabyte gap when moving the partition boundary right. I'm looking forward to that. It also fixes resetting of the missing progress bar text when applying an operation. Updates the systemd mount masking and UDEV rule location, and moves app stream metadata out of the legacy path. Starting with this release, Gparted now requires C++11 for compilation. The README file was updated to document future Debian or Ubuntu build time dependencies and provide some tidy-ups for the file system interface classes. I recommend reading Marius's article for more details or follow the changelog link in the show notes. Who can name how many different file systems Gparted handles?
Oh my goodness, a bunch. That's one of the reasons why I like it. So Gparted does a lot of different file systems. It lets you do a lot of different things to them. It makes it really easy, and it's in a GUI. I like it. I use it a lot. I will boot a Linux live disk just to be able to use Gparted on something. It's weird that I like it because I am such a KDE fan, and Gparted is Gnome. It is I don't know if that stands for Gnome Parted or GTK Parted. Either way, it uses the Gnome toolkit, and it's graphical. It's like why would you do something like that with the GUI when you could do it from the command line? Well, because sometimes it's a pain to have to go in and use the command line to do stuff. Now we'll talk about that a little later on in the show, but Gparted just gets the job done.
I'll admit,
Go ahead.
I'll admit I like it because I don't have to remember all those switches.
Yep, that's part of it.
There is CF disk. You don't need any switches there. That's in the command line, but it's graphical.
You just have to remember the commands you use with fdisk.
No, CF disk. I said.
Oh, what?
That's menu driven.
I am not familiar with CF disk. That sounds like that needs to be a command line tip one of these days. I
guess it should be. I prefer it over fdisk.
I also use Kparted. It depends on what I'm doing on which one I like better.
Yeah, I was going to say it seems like there's some things that Kparted does not handle quite as well as Gparted does.
But I think it's all the same parted program underneath.
Oh, that's possible.
So is it Gparted or is it Gparted?
It's the G partition editor is what it stands for.
GDK partition editor.
Is it GDK?
I just say G and then parted.
Tomato.
I'm with Jeff on this one. I was just hearing you two, and it's just like
Well,
You Southerners.
actually, it depends on what happens to your drive after you've used it. If it comes
might
out
cause
fine,
some,
then it was a partition editor. If it dies, then it was parted.
Then it's GPOS.
Yeah. All right, Jeff, why don't you take it away and talk about FreeSync?
Yeah, so AMD FreeSync is looking like it might get retired in kernel 6.9. And before we get into that, let's get into a little background on VRR, or variable refresh rate. And as I always say, this is a simplified explanation for the non-technical people. So keep that in mind if you're going, well, technically, or well, maybe that's a little different. This is just the overview so everybody can understand. In 2024, we're still dealing with leftover analog legacy vertical sync. In the analog days, the displays used an electron gun to shoot electrons at phosphorus, which would light up different colors to make the pictures we would see. I won't go into the details, but just know that monitors and televisions, for the most part, ran at a set frequency, such as 60 hertz. Jump forward to today, and we don't use electron guns anymore. That's all gone. The systems are digital and not analog, but we've not dropped the vertical sync. That means if a frame is ready and not synchronized with your GPU, you can get tearing in the image, because one image, it's scanning through and you have the first image, and then halfway through you have the second image, and they might not be aligned, and it has like a shift or a tear in the image. So to give better experience, the variable refresh rate was developed. G-Sync, FreeSync, Adaptive Sync are all examples of this, doing basically the same thing. Trying to just get better images without as much stuttering and tearing. This is done through changing the sync rate of the monitor to match what the GPU is able to put out. So now FreeSync is an open source software version of VRR and doesn't require dedicated chips that some solutions like certain G-Sync versions take. So it seems like this is great. Why would you consider this for retirement? The answer is desktop environments or compositors. Desktops are now adding VRR support. So this is your KDE, Gnome, and so on are building in this variable refresh rate themselves. So what's happening is the FreeSync VRR is creating a false refresh rates, and the desktop can't tell what the real refresh rate is and what's the false rate. So the way it changes that frequency of refresh is it creates some false rates. Now, because of how they work, there can even be a false 60 hertz and a real 60 hertz. And some desktops, I know KDE is one of them, remove duplicates, so they might drop the real frequency, which is which the desktop would latch on to, and if it's hooked on that fake one, it causes all sorts of graphical issues. So we can have FreeSync on, or we can have the desktop use its VRR, but not both. So looking at the bug reports, and this decision was based off of, which started this whole thing, there are talks of ways to get around this, but people were worried that small changes in the API or how things were handled could break a lot of different desktops. And it's looking like they're just going to let the desktops handle the refresh rate. So currently, FreeSync is disabled by default. They're going to see what issues it brings up. And if the issues can be solved using a modern desktop, which supports VRR, then in the future, they're going to remove FreeSync. So for those that want the full details, the article linked in the show notes also has a link to the bug report that started all of this, along with some duplicates that were flagged and called out, which get into the more technical details. So if somebody really wants the nuts and bolts, that's where you'll find it. So anybody on here have a FreeSync compatible monitor?
Yes. And I have a story about that here in just a minute. So about this, there is actually something important to keep in mind. This is not disabling FreeSync. This is disabling the FreeSync video mode. FreeSync itself is the AMD variable refresh rate technology. That will still work, and your compositor, if you're using Wayland, basically talks to that directly. And so what they're removing here is sort of this in-between shim layer that was making things, well, originally it was making things work. Now that we have Wayland that is able to talk with FreeSync directly, essentially, you can think of it that way. You no longer need the shim. And so ideally, VRR will still work and it'll still be labeled FreeSync on your monitors. It's just now there's an extra piece that does not need to be in the middle.
We're getting rid of the man in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's getting handled by the desktops.
Yes. Now, I have a story, interestingly, about how my monitor behind me used to have VRR support and have it turned on, and now it does not. And it's related to HDMI. So let's dive into that. And this will all fit together. You will see. So there was this week, just a couple of days ago, something that was not really on my radar. I have had this conversation about, DisplayPort versus HDMI and why DisplayPort is better, and didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it because, hey, I've got the big TV and it says it's running 120 hertz and it's running VRR, it's running 4K. All of the boxes, HDR, even all of the boxes that I cared about were checked. There was one thing that irritated me about so behind me, I have, for those that are not watching, I have an LG C2 47-inch OLED TV. Very nice. Very nice. It has all the bells and whistles. The one thing about it that irritated me is that on a black background, something like red text and sometimes blue text was hard to read. And I always just sort of chalk that up to it must be something about it being a TV. I have it plugged in with HDMI because TV only has HDMI. For whatever reason, they do not put DisplayPort in televisions. I wish they would. So HDMI has different versions. There is HDMI 2.0, there's HDMI 2.1. With 2.1, you can push more bandwidth to be able to do more pixels faster, essentially. To be able to do a true 4K 120 FPS, you've got to be at full. So the key, one of the keys here is color gamut. You have to be using HDMI 2.1. If you're using HDMI 2.0, yes, it can push 120 hertz at 4K, but your color gamut gets reduced. And so the kind of the key term in here, one of them at least, is it's 4:4:4 versus a color gamut of 4:2:2, which essentially means that they compress some of the colors down, which is why sometimes red and blue may be difficult to read on a black background. Come to find out, there are some test images that you can grab that will demonstrate whether or not you have this issue. And I will try to get a link to those in the show notes. So the news that broke this week is that AMD, with their open source driver, has been working with the HDMI Forum, and that's the trade group that controls HDMI, about a way to allow open source users, those of us running Linux, running the open source AMD drivers, to actually enable HDMI 2.1. Because technically speaking, it's ready to go. It's like literally just a switch to be flipped somewhere in the code for this to happen. Probably a patch uploaded, but they've made it work. They have the patch. If they got legal to sign off on it, it could happen right away. The HDMI Forum looked at their proposed solution and said, "Nah, we're not going to let you do that because you've got to pay us like $10,000 per model that uses HDMI 2.1 or whatever it is. So your open source solution, nope, we're not going to sign off on it." And that appears to be the final word. So Linux users are now limited to HDMI 2.0 if you are running an open source driver, particularly the open source AMD driver. Closed source NVIDIA, of course, they've got another way to handle this. It's not a problem. I think Intel has a closed source blob that makes this work. I don't know for sure. I've seen some reports that on Intel it's working. So for those of us in Camp AMD, one of the solutions is to get a dongle. Such a funny word. That plugs in to DisplayPort and then will spit out HDMI 2.1 out of the other end of it. And enough times happen that this is broken, and I have invested in one of those, and it does improve the color rendering. It seems that I can now read the red and the blue colors on the black background, which is nice. Couple of other things. It looks to the image just looks a little tiny bit better. Unfortunately, with the dongle, I no longer have variable refresh rate. It blocks that. So I am maybe in the market for a better converter. I don't know. I don't think it's impossible. I think it's just not working with that particular converter. But that is the sad saga of HDMI 2.1 on my big TV.
Yeah, I saw that story too. I was going to put a much different twist on it. I don't have the quite experiences you had, but my twist on this story was I think it's time we dump HDMI as an industry and find a replacement, which, DisplayPort very well could be it. Though one of the things HDMI has that DisplayPort doesn't, which usually doesn't matter for computers, is audio.
You can do audio over DisplayPort. It works. But you cannot do, I forget the term. It's where you run audio the other direction down you can do it down an HDMI cable. Yes, ARC. Thank you. There is on an ARC sort of solution for DisplayPort. You talk about what's going to replace HDMI. And I tell you, the place, you don't realize it, but the place where there's a lot of buy-in for DisplayPort is actually USB-C. If you run video over USB-C, that is usually DisplayPort alt mode, not HDMI. So, I mean, it's there. And the problem, though, is you can buy. So if you want a nice like gaming monitor, like 4K 120 hertz OLED HDR, like you have those boxes to check, and like I did, your options are you pay a little under $1,000 for a TV, or you pay like $2,500 for a gaming monitor. The gaming monitor is going to have DisplayPort on it. The TV is just going to have HDMI. Sad truck.
What's kind of crazy about that is I'm sure they have to pay the HDMI forum to have the HDMI on there, maybe if they realized
I'm sure
an alternative would be better or cheaper for them.
Well, you can't. There's just in the market right now, you cannot make a TV and not put HDMI ports on it. I mean, there's so many things that just you couldn't plug it in. So
yeah, but they could start to steer their market by including, an alternative port and
yes. Yes, I would love to see DisplayPorts on TVs. That would make me very happy.
So with this, I just wanted to ask and confuse things even further. With the HDMI 2.1, this is also affecting, I'm assuming, 2.1a and 2.1b?
Yes. Anything that is 2.1
or later.
Yeah, anything 2.1 or later. Yeah. Yep.
And it's primarily because it's not in the public domain yet.
Yeah, so there's a consortium, but they have the trademark and the patents and all of that. And it's MPEG LA all over again with MP3.
And am I correct in assuming the cable itself isn't what matters? It's the ports on the devices.
Well, you have to have a cable that is up to the spec as well, to be able to run that much bandwidth through it. But generally speaking, yeah, it's so everything in the chain has to support 2.1 to be able to get 2.1. It'll auto negotiate down to the greatest common denominator, and use that.
So like maybe what Ken's getting at, I mean, which part of it do they own? Is it the protocol? Is it just having a port that shape? Could we like just build something else over top of that and replace it without replacing hardware? I don't know, probably not.
I mean, about the only way that you can do that is use one of those dongles to be able to do a conversion from DisplayPort over to HDMI.
And to answer your question, Rob, I want to say it's HDMI owns the specification. You have to license it to even create.
Well, so here's what they own. Like, without even looking this up, I can tell you, here's what they own. They have a trademark on the term HDMI. They may have a trademark on the shape of the HDMI. They almost certainly have a patent on the shape of the HDMI port, but they also have a whole bunch of other patents on the technology that makes HDMI work. And so what they have done, it's the exact same thing that you see in audio video codecs. What they have done is they have tried to create a minefield, a legal minefield, that if you try to build something that is close to what they are building, you are stepping into their minefield, and their lawyers are going to find a place where, oh, you stepped on one of our patents, and they're going to come try to blow you up. And their entire technique is, it would be cheaper for you to just pay us the licensing fee. We're such good people. We want you to pay us the licensing fee.
Yeah, so I wonder, and it's probably part of that legal minefield. But if you already have a computer with HDMI, go into a TV with HDMI, could somebody? I know technically, probably somebody could come along, build a DisplayPort driver or a driver using like DisplayPort technologies and protocols over that HDMI hardware.
Yeah, I don't think that's really a possibility from what I understand, because it's always going to be expecting an HDMI signal, and if you try to reverse implement that, you're going to be running afoul of their patents, and there's none of the mainstream distros are willing to ship that kind of code. So
Ubuntu likes to do stuff like that. Canonical.
Well, keep in mind too. I mean, you've got was it HPCD, the hard or something like that, the hardware or copy protection, so you can't intercept the signal and steal movies. And you got with all the licensing and stuff, they're never going to open it up because it's a cash cow. Though I would argue anymore the difference between a monitor and a TV is pretty narrow, so you could get just a big monitor and use it as a TV, other than the extreme sizes. But
yeah,
price.
And the price. Getting a computer monitor that big is just ridiculously expensive. Oh, let's continue talking about variable refresh rate and let Rob talk about Gnome VRR.
Well,
Gnome goes VRRRR.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So you guys touched on quite a few things already so it kind of shortens this up. So I'll just try to get quickly through the story and out of here on to the next. So, in Xorg, tools like the soon-to-be discontinued FreeSync that we talked about earlier were used to achieve variable refresh rate, along with other things depending on what hardware is and all that. In Wayland, I believe KDE has been ahead of GNOME for supporting variable refresh rate for a while, but along with some of the others too, it looks like they've been ahead too. But in GNOME, it's been a work in progress, and it seems like there are ways still to get to work from what I understand it if you really try, but not officially in the GUI. So after 3 years of working on it, GNOME 46 will be shipping with variable refresh rate configurable in the GUI, and the feature is it's so valuable that GNOME has made an exception to the feature freeze to allow this to get added to GNOME 46 after that feature freeze was in place. But that could also be due to the experimental flag that is tied to that feature as well. Because it is still just marked as experimental in GNOME 46. So it won't be enabled by default, but by running one simple command, it will add variable refresh rate to your GNOME display settings. For those who want to add that feature, your bonus command line tip for today's show is, here it is. You just got to type this out, and you can also check the show notes for it, but it's in the command line, gsettings space set space org.gnome.mutter, M-U-T-T-E-R, mutter, space experimental dash features space and then double quotes, left bracket, single quote, variable dash refresh dash rate, single quote, right bracket, double quote. So if you got all that down, you don't need to look at the notes, but you're probably best to look at the show notes or look it up if you want to get that variable refresh rate. And then you can just, once it's configured or once it gets out of experimental, you can go into your settings, Gnome settings, you can pick your preferred refresh rate, and then it will dynamically select refresh. So as I think it was kind of mentioned earlier, maybe it wasn't, but great for like games, allowing the system to negotiate that refresh rate instead of just staying at 1. It can adjust the refresh rate of your monitor to match what you're doing, the gaming or videos, I guess, too. Gaming's where I'm looking forward to it, but yeah,
it has some advantages for watching videos too. But gaming is where your GPU is probably most likely to not be able to keep up with the system's refresh rate, and so you get into some weird situations with gaming where you've got either you get tearing because the frame is only partway ready to go, or a frame gets held back, and so it ends up cutting the refresh rate, or excuse me, your frame rate even further than it would because a frame is not ready to go, and so you double show one frame and then it jumps to the next one, and so it kind of ends up, if you don't have variable refresh rate, it'll almost limit you down to like the lower notch that's a factor of whatever you're running at. So like if you're at 60, then and your video card can only push out 45 frames, your actual experience may only be 30 frames because it's having to wait to be able to catch up.
You get stuttering.
Yes. That is a much quicker and easier way to say what I was trying to explain. Thank you.
I got your back, Jonathan.
Thank you, sir. Right. Let's talk about Kali. Ken, what is new with Kali?
What is new with Kali? That's a good question. Well, I'm going to tell you, thanks to the article Marius wrote about Offensive Security's release of Kali Linux 2024.1. In keeping with tradition, Kali Linux 2024.1 brings a theme refresh for a fresh new look and feel by adding new wallpapers and themes to the desktop, bootloader, and login screen, as well as a few new app icons. The theme refresh was done for both the regular Kali and Kali Purple editions. New tools included in this update are the Blue Hydra Bluetooth device discovery service, Open Taxi server implementation from Eclectical. I'm not sure how to. Eclectical Q, ReadP, command line tools to manipulate Windows PE files, Snort flexible network intrusion detection system. I should have just said IDS for that. And above, an invisible protocol sniffer for finding vulnerabilities in the network. Kali Linux 2024.1 updates the Kali Net Hunter edition for mobile devices with support for the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra, Realme C15, TicWatch Pro 3, and I can never remember how to say this, Xiaomi Poco X3 NFC devices, while support for the Samsung Galaxy X9 Plus device has been updated. Kali Net Hunter now also supports Android 14.
I've got to say, it's actually pretty cool. I've set this up before. It helps if you're rooted in like running Lineage. Setting up Kali on a phone is pretty slick. It's really nice to be able to run all of these tools. And I think they also will even launch I think they'll launch a desktop for you that you can get into as well, right on Android. It's a pretty slick experience. It's fun.
So does that mean it's running the Linux kernel 6.6 LTS on the Android device as well as the desktop?
I don't think so. So it's not running its own kernel. It's running whatever Android is running for the kernel. And when I installed it, it was essentially like an add-on package that sat on top of Android. But because Android is so Linuxy underneath, all of these things pretty much just work. I don't know if Kali has an actual like Android system image. I don't think they do.
Well, speaking of images, I guess it's time to update my Ventoy drive again.
Yep. Yeah, I don't have Kali on my Ventoy. I probably ought to fix that. It would be a useful one to have.
That along with Clonezilla and the Gparted live ISO.
Yeah, I do all of that stuff just out of Fedora, which it's like a forever to-do list thing to go and make a customized Fedora ISO that has some of those tools built into it already.
And SpinRite 6.1 is now Ventoy capable.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Hey, that's cool.
Yeah. Steve made another spin, and basically it didn't work because it was too big. So he took out the Windows stuff.
Mhm.
So how we use it, booting off the DOS, it's small enough it still works. So
Cool. I need to go back and check out SpinRite. I've got a license for it. I don't know, my license may be SpinRite 5. Seems like it's been a while.
I've got a license for SpinRite 6.0.
Yeah, I'll just go back and check. It is a useful tool to have. I pretty much reach for DD Rescue these days, but I have had some success with rescuing things with SpinRite too in the past.
I think when we're talking about Kali Linux, it's good to shout out a quick PSA and just let people know that Kali is a purpose-built tool. It is designed for primarily offensive, like pen testing. It isn't generally something you should use as a general purpose desktop. You know, if you just want to use a desktop and have no interest in offensive security.
Yep.
So just if you want to learn Linux, get a general purpose desktop. If you want to utilize the tools, you can still utilize a lot of the tools in other desktops, but it does have a great list of tools pre-built for offensive security.
Yes, and I think Kali Purple is almost intended to be more like build your own network box, because it's got all of those like intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention systems, and all of those built right into it. But
Right.
again, very much purpose driven. I would not want to try to run daily drive Kali. No.
Yeah, they always had their red team distribution for years, and then I think it must have been last year we talked about it when they added purple, which is a combination of red side, blue side. For those who don't know, IT security, red being the offensive team, blue is being the offensive team when you're doing penetration testing. So red and blue makes purple, so you got the purple distribution. It has things for both.
Yep, makes sense.
Though there are some jobs where it probably would be your daily driver.
Yeah, maybe. I could see having a machine set up with Kali as a daily driver on it, if that is what that machine is going to be for. Yeah, makes sense. All right, Jeff, let's talk about Zen. Let's find our Zen place.
yeah. Oh yeah, we're going Zen, and we're going back to my roots, hardware.
Yes.
So our friend Michael Arable over at Phronix has been doing more benchmarking with the 8000 series of chips from AMD. Last time I was on the show, we went over how to lower power states and how they hold up to other CPUs. This time he's looking at the two types of cores in these chips, the performance and efficiency cores. In AMD's case, they're the normal Zen 4 cores and the Zen 4C cores. So AMD's got a little different vernacular, and they operate a little differently. The C cores are the efficiency ones, and while they're similar to the normal cores, they're clocked slower at 3.73 gigahertz instead of the standard core's 5.07 gigahertz. So now when you look at these tests, you might think, why aren't there just C cores and in here? And the reason is the BIOS. There's no way in the BIOS to turn off core 0. So no matter what you do, core 0 has to be there, and it's a normal full speed core. So in the article, Michael explains how he was able to tell each core what it was. And, it might be an interesting thing to talk about in the future or leave it as an exercise for the listener. But bottom line, you can see how the cores and the threads are matched up and then look at the maximum frequency. So that's how you can tell what's the normal core, what's the C cores. So the 8500G that Michael was testing has 2 normal cores and 4 C cores, and they all hyperthread, which is different than the Intel efficiency cores. They don't hyperthread, but the AMD efficiency cores or the C cores, they do hyperthread. So it has a total of 12 threads that can be run. Now, when you're looking at the testing, it's going to be broken up into, one Zen 4 core, one Zen 4, one Zen C, and then 2 regular Zen 4s, and then it just continues on from there. You always have 2 normal cores, the Zen 4 cores, and then you have no C, 1C, 2C, 3C, 4C. So you've got a lot of different testing runs there with various mix of normal cores and C cores, and based on how they interact, you can extrapolate what like pure C cores would do. Now, looking at the results, I thought the results looked pretty good. They averaged out that when using, say, 2 normal cores versus 1 normal and 1 C core, using the lower powered core was around 85% of the performance. So that's 1 normal, 1 C was 85% of the performance of 2 normal cores. And when you think that the C cores are 3.7 gigahertz versus the normal core speed of 5 gigahertz, yeah, I think that's pretty good. And what really stuck out was the power in the benchmarking suite. Adding C cores, the various counts of them, was going to use around 2 to 3 watts more power for each core added. So 85% of the performance, and you're just running 2 or 3 watts on these cores. That's really good. Now, I do want to note that this is a monolithic chip and not a bunch of leftovers glued together. So this was purpose built as this. This isn't like, oh, we're just blowing some fuses on a normal core and we're going to downclock it. And no, it was purpose designed this way. I've seen comments that this might even be a better design than the Intel chip, the P versus E setup, because a miss on the thread scheduler isn't going to be such a hit because the chips are closer together, and getting rid of a couple gigahertz will still give you great power savings, but you're also allowing hyperthreading. So you're not, it's a little more elegant if things go wrong and your scheduler doesn't pick the right core to send your workload to. Though I should note, Intel's talking about removing hyperthreading, so we'll see what the future holds. But any thoughts from the rest of the gang?
I'm flipping through these results. Only a few surprises, and they're not really all that surprising.
They hover around the 80% for the most part. There's a few where it really dips down, and some are really close, but they hang about 80% roughly all the way through.
Yeah. The one thing that I'm seeing here that's interesting is the performance per watt chart, and the 2 full-size Zen cores versus adding in to 2 Zen cores with a single 4C. And you've got at least one of these tests where your performance per watt is better with just the 2 Zen cores as opposed to the 2+1. And I don't know, that kind of makes me think that maybe the way that they have this chip split up to add in the underpowered, the C cores, there's maybe a big part of the chip that has to get turned on. It's just interesting to look at.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know that these were purpose built this way. I fully expected that these chips were from their bad runs, and they do the testing, and we put 6 processors on here, but we've got some of them that just can't scale up all the way to 5 gigahertz. I figured that's what it was.
I thought that too until I did some digging, and it's like, nope, it is one monolithic chip, but only having 12 threads and what's in there, it's going to be pretty. It's not going to be a big honking piece of silicon.
Right.
And the ones that don't work quite right, that's where you get the, was it 8400 and 8300? You turn off this one C core didn't work as well. We'll turn off a couple of these and then downgrade the 8000 series.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Let's talk about CachyOS. And we're not really going to talk about CachyOS because that's not what's interesting here. I've got a story. It's another Phoronix benchmark. But this one is about the Arch-based CachyOS and the fact that you can install AMD 64 v3 or AMD 64 v4 binaries. And we've talked about this a little bit before. And there's several distros that are starting to look at this, by the way. Most modern processors, except for the last few years, are going to be what we call x86 64 v3. What you have to get the v4 support is the AVX 512 extensions, and that's the idea of we're gonna give this really big number to the processor, 512 bits long number, and we've got these specialized instructions that are just for manipulating this really long number. And there are some things that you can do with that that's really clever, like you do string compares with it. You can compare a whole 512 bits of two strings, or you can do multiple number crunching of smaller numbers at the same time in the process with single instruction. That's the sort of thing. And so when you compile for your processor, you can set the flags. Hey, I want to compile this for the x86 v3 target or the x86 64 v4 target. The idea is if you compile it specifically for v4, the compiler can do more of those optimization tricks. And there's a couple of distros. In fact, OpenSUSE is actually looking into this idea of what if we just ship both ways and grab the one that makes most sense for the computer that somebody's going to be running on. And so they've actually added support for this to RPM to be able to offer two different versions of a package. So if you're running on the latest and greatest, and you've got AVX 512 support, we will send you the V4 package. And if you're running on something a little bit older, we'll ship you the V3 package. And so you may ask, how much of a difference does this actually make? And that's the story that we have here going through the Phoronix article. And so he ran all of these tests in three different ways. One was things that are not compiled for either V3 or V4. So those are generally going to be like a x86 64 v2 sort of compiler level. And then specifically for V3, specifically for V4. And I tell you, the interesting thing is it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. It makes a little difference, but it's not a huge difference. It's like in the somewhere around 5% range for most of these. So some of them, a much bigger difference. Like, for example, he ran a GNU radio test, and that's like a 33% performance improvement. But most of these run pretty much neck and neck. So it boils down to the same story as we usually have when we talk about sort of fine tuning of systems. It depends upon what you're doing with them. Most things you're probably not going to really feel it at all, but certain things it'll make a big difference. So I don't think, have any of us played around with the x86 64 v4? Do any of us actually have a desktop that does x86 v4?
I do. And we have played around a little bit, and it kind of came down to what you were saying, where, there's certain heavy computational loads that really make a difference. Maybe fluid simulation or like the GNU radio, kind of thing.
That too is going to be a lot of big number crunching. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you're not doing that, it really didn't make a difference. It was, so small that it's one of those, technically it's better, but realistically you'll never know the difference.
And
unless you're benchmarking.
Yeah.
And the newer software is going to slow it down anyways.
That's true. Software seems to slow down to the slowest that people will tolerate it running regardless of the hardware. The other side of this story is if you're on AMD hardware, that x86 64 v4 is only the last generation of chips. I think it may have been Zen 4 was when AMD finally supported AVX 512.
I think it
That's
was
what
Zen
the article
3.
says.
Oh, is it?
Did they add it in 3?
I thought it was 3. I know Zen 1 did not support it. To get level 4, it's the last 5 years in chips or so. It's fairly recent.
It is Zen 4. AMD Zen 4 adds AVX 512. Yeah. And the way that they do it, the way that AMD does it is different than the way Intel does it. Big surprise. They double pump. So when you do an AVX 512 on AMD, rather than having this super wide pipe, they just split it in half, throw it through there twice real quick, and it works. Apparently it works, so I won't.
Well, in the consumer chip, so Intel's backing out of AVX 512.
Yes, that is very interesting. And
they're saving it for their professional chips.
Yes, it is. It's a very odd inversion there between the two.
Is that so they can charge more money for those chips?
Sure.
Yeah. Exactly.
Doesn't double pump refer to the wave? As in, like, normally it's only on one stroke, but double pump gets on the up and down stroke or something like that.
I think it depends on what context you're talking about, but yeah, from what I understood with the way AMD is doing it, they don't do the entire 512 bits at once. They break it in half, and they double pump. They just refers to doing it, breaking it in half, and apparently they can run as fast that way. It's processor magic. I don't know. I don't design processors.
Well, because a lot of times,
magic. Ring.
Yeah,
you do video editing, right?
I do a little of that, not much.
The big thing is whenever you have those kind of instructions, they take a whole lot of circuitry and bigger pipes, and sometimes it is faster just to say, because you're limited, like say clock to your slowest instructions. So a lot of times it's easier to go, well, if we do this twice, we're better off than having this other big complicated set of circuitry to handle this computation.
Yeah, makes sense. It does. All right. That was me. Rob. Rob is up next. Bad news for Grandma's PC. Sad trumpet.
So I'm going to do a little bit of nostalgia here to set the story. So I remember back around 2016 or so, I was a PC technician in a computer repair shop, and I work on a lot of Windows stuff. But a lot of people around that time were upgrading from Windows 7 to Windows 10. And around that same time, Microsoft removed their base games like Solitaire and probably a few others from their operating system. So I think it actually removed it when you did the upgrade. So what I'm going to talk about isn't quite that bad. But so at that time, it actually removed a lot of the games. So that seemed, that seems like a simple no news kind of day. It's like, who cares? Solitaire's gone, whatever, right? Well, the majority of our customers were elderly, and their main usage of their computer seemed to be for Solitaire. So when that went away, you wouldn't believe the outrage we saw. They bring their computer in, and we'd upgrade it. They take it home. We're like, "Where's my Solitaire?" So we worked with them to install a replacement. They had one in the store, and I'm several years away from that now. I have no idea what the state of Solitaire is on Windows these days, but that's how it was several years ago when I was doing that kind of thing. So, bringing us to this story. Once again, as seems to happen so often, Canonical has decided to kind of follow in footsteps, copy Microsoft.
They pull the windows.
Yeah, they do this often, right? By dropping games from their full Ubuntu install. I understand removing from their minimal install. I don't want anything in that. But for the full install, it's supposed to be a fully packed packed with software and everything you could possibly need. And these games, and their dependencies, they only took about 65 megabytes of space. That's nothing. So a decade or so ago, there were around 15 games installed in Ubuntu. The last release included 4 games, and those were Solitaire, Mahjong, Mines, and Sudoku. Classics like this deserve a place on your computer, but will be gone in Ubuntu 24.04 LTS. If you upgrade, they're not going to remove them. They're not going to do like Microsoft did, but if you do a fresh install, they're not going to be there. So, most of us, techie people like us, who use Linux, all Linux podcasts, probably people listening like this, are going to think nothing of this. But Linux has become more popular these days. And we have folks like Grandma and Grandpa using Linux, and they play a lot of solitaire games. I see this in my Linux groups. There's such a range of people who don't know the deeps inside and out. They're not in Linux to play and do all the fun little technical stuff. They're just using it as their computer, and solitaire is something I'm sure they use it for.
Yeah.
So just remember, next time you set up Ubuntu for someone in that crowd kind of group, you might want to make sure to install those games before you leave. It could really help avoid angry calls later that day when they can't find their solitaire.
Or calls that go like this. I tried to install solitaire on this new Linux that you gave me, and I went to the internet and Googled for it, and I downloaded these 13 programs, but none of them really seemed to be the solitaire I was looking for. And now my computer's telling me I need to call some number, and when I called, it was a guy in India talking about Windows. What's going on here?
Yeah, and this is something kind of silly, because why don't they have, especially with their new installer, just have a list of like, oh, do you want the games pack installed? Because we do it for a lot of the hardware stuff. Or do you want the non-free items? It's just a little radio button. You go click, yep, I want it, and it just auto installs it.
It's the new Ubuntu with the entertainment pack.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't care. On occasion, I will open up and play a little solitaire. It's been quite a while now, but
actually, I didn't even
I've never
know
played it.
Ubuntu came with solitaire.
Well, I don't know either. I don't use Ubuntu. I don't use
so.
Ubuntu on the desktop, so.
Oh, all right.
Let me see if OpenSUSE has it.
Well, I'm looking right now. Yeah, they got a patience card game, K-Mines, like a Minesweeper. Yeah. Looks like Mahjong, K-Sudoku. I'm running Kubuntu. Yeah, so they got some games.
Touch card?
Fancy. Probably not touch card by default.
My OpenSUSE does not come with solitaire. I searched for it and it came up with the install page, so I can install it. But still,
really. Really, so I joked about that earlier, but really this is an opportunity to teach someone how to properly install things using your software center, whether that be Discover or Software Center or what have you.
If you're installing this for somebody or giving somebody a computer with Linux and they don't know, it's like the one thing you have to do anyway.
Indeed. All right, let's talk Shotcut and ambisonic audio. And I'm not entirely sure I know what ambisonic audio is, but I bet Ken does.
Well, according to Bobby Borishelf, Shotcut has been updated to release 24.02. This release brings many new features and improvements. Among these are support for AMD's AV1 hardware encoder on Windows and Linux, automatic vertical scrolling on the timeline, and enhanced image clip manipulation. Shotcut 24.02 also addresses several issues from previous versions, enhancing user experience with fixes for audio-video clip grouping, selection behavior in the timeline, and speed adjustment with ripple editing enabled. Bobby also writes about Shotcut introducing, as you said, Jonathan, ambisonic audio support. Now, according to Wikipedia, ambisonics is a full sphere surround sound format In addition to the horizontal plane, it covers sound sources above and below you. If you want more details about this support, I recommend reading Bobby's article or Shotcut's release announcement instead of listening to me triple over all these long words that he uses.
Now there is a I'm trying to remember the details. There is a pretty popular sort of ambisonic audio system out there now. It's the one with the upward firing speakers that you can get.
Isn't it Dolby 10.1 or something like that?
Yeah, it's a Dolby thing. I forget they've got a term for it.
Atmos?
Yeah, I think that's it. It's Dolby Atmos.
Yeah.
That's really pretty similar. I wonder if supporting ambisonic gets them Dolby Atmos support sort of for free. I don't know.
Could be.
And
for anybody that's not
having
aware,
to use.
you actually hear sounds. You know, when you have speakers behind you and even to the side, you don't hear as well. It's 180 degrees to the side and forward, but also vertical. You hear a lot better. Behind you, you don't have near the resolution and clarity that you do of where objects are and where they're coming from.
Because your ears point forward-ish.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so I mean, the way your ears work, the way that you can tell where something is kind of in that space is because of that complicated structure that the outside of your ears have. And when something bounces against your earlobes in different ways, it changes the way something sounds. And our brains are wired in this incredible way that just in a real-time process, we can detect that change in sound and know that where something is coming from. And so basically the 2 points of data that you've got that make that work are how loud, well, I guess 3 points, how loud something is in each ear, if there's any delay between ear to ear, and then that subtle shading of the audio from where it hits your earlobes. And those 3 little bits of information is enough for your brain, the targeting computer baked into your brain to figure out, oh, it's over there, I hear it. And that's essentially what all of this stuff is designed to take advantage of and work with.
Better than
GPS.
I mean, GPS takes three satellites. We can do it with 2 sensors. And
Yeah,
we can triangulate.
better than GPS.
Triangulate means 3, but we can triangulate with only 2 sensors, which is
Some of us have to make do with 1.
Yeah. So is that duoangulate?
Monoangulate?
Mono, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, really high-end audio, they take forms of people's ears because a lot of our ears are slightly different, and they'll put them in like head-like models to find out how high-end audio sounds like from speakers just based on ear shape, and try to truly map, whenever a speaker's making a certain sound, after it bounces around your ear and into your ear canal, how does it change, and how do they have to change the sound so it's perfect in your ear? I mean, there's a lot of science that goes pretty deep into this stuff.
that would be real tricky, when you're talking about earbuds, because you're bypassing all of that structure there.
Yeah.
Well, and that's also where you try to map it so that the sound coming out of your ear pods, how do they distort that sound so it sounds even more natural, like it's coming from a speaker? And there's like audio processing or tricks they can do to say, oh, well, we need to change the waveforms a certain way so it doesn't sound like it's from little tiny speakers in your ear, but actual large speakers.
Yeah.
I do want to say, I thanks for the update, Ken. I haven't been up to date on it, but I am a Shotcut user on pretty much every OS or anywhere I edit video. It's a good app for it.
All right, Jeff is up next, and Jeff, I have to ask: is this sort of depressing? Like in previewing this one, this almost seems depressing. He's got the list of new Steam games, and
it's not.
Well, okay, take it away. Tell us the story, and then I will tell you why I find it slightly depressing.
Okay, well, so now this is going to upgrade. It's time to upgrade Grandma's gaming. We had Rob kind of getting down on Grandma, but we're just upgrading her gaming. So this is a little different. We're going to talk about native Steam game or native Linux games. So for anybody who knows the US show The Brady Bunch and the middle daughter having a catchphrase of Marcia, 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 because she felt like everything was about her older sister. Well, on our show, it's kind of the same way about gaming, except we always say Proton, Proton, Proton. Well, we talk about a Proton a lot because it's a big gateway into gaming on Linux. You know, it'll let Windows games run on normal Linux. Using Steam, it'll run on normal Linux machines. But this isn't the only gateway for those who don't want to, want a game and don't want to run Proton for whatever reason, or, maybe they can't for reasons. There's still native Linux games being developed, and I wanted to call out some of them and who need or want to run native without an emulator involved. And they're actually, for example, 54 new native Linux Steam games released from January 21st to the 28th. Now, we're going to keep this in perspective. 342 games for Windows were released in that same time. So basically 15.8% were native Linux games, which, I wish we had 15.8% of the Steam market. I wish on the survey, maybe we'll get there someday. But the article in the show notes lists some games the author thought should be highlighted. Now, I'm just going to go through a few of them, like Wrath, Aeon of Ruin. And this is a first-person shooter, kind of reminds me of Doom, one of the older ones. It's not going to have super high-resolution graphics, but they're still good. And just because it doesn't have the latest ray tracing doesn't mean it isn't going to be a lot of fun. And I always figure game is good when I forget about the quality of graphics because I'm having so much fun. Next, we have up Cozy Island Idle. So let me say that again. Cozy Island Idle. So this is just a fishing game where you catch fish and put them in an aquarium to sell them and buy things to customize your island you're on and the aquarium you're putting the fish in. So it's very low stress game, kind of just something to relax to. I did want to call out the Window Kill as a very unique game. They call it a twin stick shooter, which isn't unusual, but the fact your game window is closing in on you. So you shoot the window's edges to push it around the screen and to open it up. And as you fight and dodge enemy and bosses in their own window. So look at the preview on that. It's kind of wild. I haven't seen anything like that before. Project Ictos. All you have to do is reach the screen edge, but you can't touch anything. And there's spinning shapes and gears along with other things shooting laser beams. And that one's kind of interesting too. There's a lot of, reaching the edge of the screen is harder than it sounds. And the last one I'm going to cover is Last Epic. And it's described as an action-adventure RPG. Looking at the preview, it reminds me a lot of Diablo. One of the later ones with like really good graphics. It was released on Windows in 2018, I do believe. So it's a Windows port, but I think it looks good, and I'm like, I'm going to have to get into that one because I kind of like Diablo, so and RPGs. So I'll put it on my list. Now I haven't gone over all the games in the article linked in the show notes, and you just to keep in mind, you could always filter Steam games to see which ones are native only, so you don't have to use Proton if you don't want to. So I think Grandma's going to be ready to go a little more hardcore gaming.
All right. So I did not notice that this was only a week's worth of new games. So I'm a little less depressed. I thought this was like, several months worth of new Linux games. And it's like, if this is all we have to show for it, there's a problem because that's not much. Okay. A little bit better. Yeah, so I kind of have this opinion that so many games work so well on Proton, it's kind of drying up the market for native games. Is that something you guys think?
I thought so, because I'm thinking, why even? Because you always hear when people talk about developing games for Linux, how hard it is because of all the different desktops and how things are laid out. There's a lot of work that goes into it. But if you're just like, we can use a few, stay away from certain commands, in the programming, and then it's Wine capable or Proton capable, why not? So to hear that there was 15.8% of the games coming out were Linux native really surprised me.
Yeah. And so I'll jump in real quick with a quick question. The other side of that is, what percentage of games do you think the developers went, boy, it'd be nice if this would work on the Steam Deck? Higher than 15%, I'm sure.
85%.
Yeah, probably about 85%.
I know, though, in my own experience, multiple games, even though they have native Linux ports, I run it through Proton because it just works better. Like, there are several that I've ran into over time that something just is not right. Usually it's, well, I mean, it's a game, of course, it has to do with video or display or something, but usually it's something like resolution or my mouse not lining up right or something weird like that. And I'm like, hey, let me just try the Proton. Oh, look, works great. Boom. So
here's the thing. Here's why that's a thing. There is a fundamental difference between the way Microsoft approaches the world with Windows and how Linux distributions approach the world. Linux, everything except the kernel API, we move fast and we break things on purpose. On Windows, you can still run, if you're running a 32-bit version of Windows, you can still run Windows 3.1 applications. And some of them will actually still work because Microsoft tries really, really hard to not break support for old programs when they do a rev from one Windows version to the next. Over in Linux land, we don't care because all the stuff we really care about is open source. And go fix your program. We'll recompile it. We'll make it work. We'll make a patch for it. Distros. We'll make a patch for it to make it work. It's fine. Nobody cares until you have the closed source proprietary games that are not getting constant support because the people that care enough to do it don't have access to the source code. So there is kind of this dichotomy of the way the two systems work. And it's why we're in this weird place where the most stable API for gaming on Linux is writing Windows games and running them under Proton.
Writing Windows 3.1 games and running them under Proton.
I think you probably do that in DOSBox, but still.
Well, even Linus Torvalds himself talks about it. And years ago, he was in an interview and they talked about he had some diving software, or he was helping on diving software. And they said it was for Windows, Mac, but they're not going to do it on Linux because of it's so much harder because of all the different, the APIs, and each distribution does stuff a little different. And so our flexibility is also our Achilles heel.
Yeah. And you can do it. Like once you get with an application, once you get kind of a critical mass, you have enough users that also know what they're doing and enough distro maintainers involved in the project, you can do it. You can make it happen. And it actually gets to the point to where it's pretty easy because somebody will step in and do it. But if it's a small project, somebody's doing it by themselves, to try to make sure that it runs on every different distro and that it stays up to date, it's a real challenge. It really is.
And that's where FlatHub steps in, isn't it?
That is one of the solutions. Yeah. Let's see. So that probably means that there's a story about FlatHub coming up, right?
Nope.
Okay.
There is, just not next. It's more of a tip today.
I'm so used to Ken coming in with the segues, just riding the segues through our conversation.
I too, because I thought I knew I had something about FlatHub, but I wasn't looking at my notes. I'm like, oh shoot, am I next? So I quick jumped over my notes. I'm like, oh wait, no, that's a tip.
Yeah, no. So that is actually a real valid point, Ken. That the app image and snaps even and all of those things that is what they're for. They are trying to solve that problem. With varying degrees of success. Funnily, one of the other projects I'm involved in, I did a compile of a test version of it on. I've got an all-in-one machine down there. The screen is half dead, and it's running Debian to be able to do development testing on. And so I did the compile there. And this framework, it's cool. It makes a app image for you as part of the compile process. So I compiled it over there, got the app image, SCP'd it across to the Fedora machine behind me, and it will not work on the Fedora machine. It works great on the Debian machine, and that app image just will not play with my Fedora machine. It's kind of weird. So it is not always a perfect solution.
Well, it could be the way App Image does it different than Flatpak. If they had a built-in Flatpak or Snap, one of those may be more cross-compatible.
Yeah. Well, with app image particularly, there's this question of how many libraries do you want to put into the app image? Like you could put all of them in there, but then your app image is huge. Or you can say, well, we're just going to assume that everyone that's going to try to run this is going to have this library and this library and this library. So we're going to leave them out of the app image. I'm not sure how much flexibility you have to do that with, say, for instance, Snap, whether it kind of mandates that you grab all of those libraries. I don't know. That's something to look into, I suppose.
I'd like to try to package some stuff in Flatpak and Snap sometime just to see how it works.
Yeah.
I've done apt or apt-get stuff years ago.
That would be a good. I would love to hear that, Rob. If you want to go and say, okay, I got this program, I'm going to package it as a Snap, and then one is a Flatpak and one is an app image. Here's what I ran into.
Yeah. That might be separate stories and separate months.
Yeah. Oh, all right. Let's see.
Or you just save all of them up for the end of the year.
Yeah.
Maybe.
We should give Rob his own show for one episode. It should be Rob talking about all of that. That would be the end of the show. So I've got a story about Pingora, and that is maybe the Nginx killer. Maybe we'll see. Pingora. I think we've talked about this before. It's been floating around the internet for a long time now. Well, several months now. That's a long time in internet years. So it is it's the Cloudflare replacement for Nginx. Cloudflare basically said, we want to build our own infrastructure to sit out in front of all of the rest of our infrastructure to do things like load balancing. And I'm sure there is a lot of like intrusion prevention stuff that they build into theirs. And historically, Nginx is the kind of the engine that gets used for this. And Cloudflare came along and said, we're going to build our own. We're going to build it in Rust. And they called it Pingora. So the new news is that Cloudflare is releasing Pingora as open source, which is really cool. I'm pretty excited about it. I definitely have plans to go play around with it. The interesting thing about Pingora is it is not a web server. It is not a one-to-one Apache or Nginx replacement. It is a framework. And so you get to sort of build your own web server on top of it, which sounds terrifying. But when you actually look at their examples, it's not too bad. But the fun thing is that you actually build it in Rust. And so they've got an example here about building a load balancer where you have one front end and two back ends. And like that is a complicated thing. That is not a trivial problem to solve. And they have this done in their example. It's loadbalancer.rs, and they solve it in 96 lines of Rust using, of course, the Pingora proxy program behind it. That's pretty fascinating. That's pretty interesting to me. Definitely something to watch. And with kind of all of the drama going on around Nginx, I would not be surprised to see some uptick of Pingora as a Nginx replacement.
I saw this earlier in the week and I thought about having it as one of my stories, but I couldn't wrap my head around it. But you kind of explained it, like you said, like being an Nginx killer. But I'm reading about it. I'm like, but it doesn't sound like a web server. So I was confused about what it was.
Yeah, well, so the deal with that is you have to remember that Nginx is hardly ever used as a full-on web server. I use Nginx. I do not use Nginx as a web server. I use Nginx as a proxy that gives me HTTPS, and it sits in front of the virtual machines that actually have the web servers.
It's often recommended, though, as a web server.
Yeah.
I don't use it.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people end up doing that, using it as just the proxy and something else as the web server itself, whether that's Apache or Flask or some Java abomination or, what have you.
Tomcat.
Yeah, Tomcat, I suppose. Like I said, some Java abomination. Plenty of shade to throw. All right. Let's talk about, I guess this is the other side of the coin.
This is
Servo. Is Servo in Rust?
Yeah. So, we were talking about we're talking about the server side and something that could be a killer of web server infrastructure. Well, here we're going to talk about some web rendering and the one that Jonathan just talked about, that's in Rust, and this one is too. So we all know the internet, it's a dangerous place, and so many vulnerabilities in our web browsers and their web rendering engines make it to be an easy target often. So, and then also there's, the fact that Rust, being the memory safe programming language of choice these days, wouldn't it be great if our browsers could be built on Rust? But, I've often heard it said that it would be extremely difficult for anyone to develop a new web rendering engine today from scratch. I'm sure I've heard Leo mention it. We probably said things about it on the show here today. But so then we're just kind of stuck with a handful that we have today. WebKit, which is Blink, and now Gecko, the Apple Abomination, whatever that one's called again.
Safari?
Well, Safari, but isn't there an engine under that?
I'm sure there is, yes.
Whatever.
Gecko.
Gecko's Firefox. Whatever. Anyway, but this being stuck on it kind of makes it seem like the new Rust engine is unlikely. But did you know there already is a Rust-based web engine in the works out there in the wild? So Servo is the embeddable, independent, memory-safe, modular, parallel web rendering engine written in Rust. It probably isn't ready for prime time, as the download page says you probably shouldn't use it to log into bank accounts yet. But it has been in development since 2012. It was starting in the Mozilla group, but I think it was 2020 or so, give or take. It went to the Linux Foundation. So now it's under the Linux Foundation. So Servo released a blog sharing their accomplishments in February, improving experimental support for HTML tables and more CSS features. A list of some of those accomplishments include support for SVG, support for non-XR game controllers, basic support for CSS text transform property, basic support for font fallback, much better support for Servo experimental support for HTML tables. Windows containing videos will no longer crash when closed, and autoplay is also now supported. There's many CSS bug fixes. They're continuing to enhance the ability for embedding the Servo web engine into other applications. And then also in the list that I read, or that I have here compiled from Phoronix, as of this week, with the latest code changes, the classic Space Jam website can now render correctly. So could this be the next big browser engine, the next big browser engine killer? Maybe someday, but it isn't ready yet to replace Firefox, Gecko, Chrome's Blink. But if you have any embedded projects that need a simple web interface, this might be all you need.
There's a reason why it's said that we will like it. There's a reason that we say that it is a Herculean effort to build a new browser from scratch. And as they are proving, it is a Herculean effort. and one of the deals here is that the kind of the whole stack of the web code is such a moving target, and there's so many pieces to it, because we got HTML, which is relatively simple, but you've got CSS, and we now have CSS3, and they're still talking about CSS2 support. CSS3 is out there. And then you've got the entire mess that is JavaScript. And then you also have like the WebAssembly stuff and all of that. It's a lot to try to bring from scratch a web browser up to modern specs. There's a reason that the comment is made.
See, does it work with homestarrunner.com? That there's a level of test right there.
Yeah.
I was going to download it and test it today, but for you guys, I had some computer issues this afternoon and my hard drive died. So instead of testing some stuff out, I ended up fixing my computer so I could do the show.
We appreciate that choice. We really do.
So I will bundle that in with my OpenSUSE review and my Warp terminal review.
Yeah. No, it'd be fun to try it, I feel like, and just see what the web looks like through the eyes of Servo. Neat experience.
Yeah. Cool to see if I could easily embed that into something new. But.
Yeah. It's a good excuse to learn Rust. Have it on your front end and your back end.
Oh yeah, there's that part. I have to learn Rust.
Well, so looking at the Pingora example, like that doesn't look too bad. We talked last week, the week before, I looked at like some higher level Rust, and it's like, I can't make heads or tails out of this. No, this is a little bit more discernible. It kind of looks like JavaScript actually, but we won't go there. It looks like something I can make heads or tails out of, so it's a little bit better. It does look a lot like JavaScript, which is kind of scary. Anyway,
I'm all right. I don't mind working with JavaScript. It's not my number one favorite, but I don't mind it.
There's a certain level of JavaScript where it gets really ugly, though.
Yeah, I think what I like best is, when it comes to the open source world, JavaScript has been historically, until they started base64 and encrypting stuff, historically has been like the most open source language, because you just view source and it's all right there. So it's just easy to look and see how people did stuff over the years.
Yeah.
In the past, when you were a kid.
With JavaScript, though, you get into some ugly, super long expression lines. It's like, this dot this dot this dot this open parentheses this dot this dot this open parentheses this dot this quote close quote close parentheses dot this close parentheses dot this, and just the things that you can do with that are painful. And then the other side of that with JavaScript, because it tends to be a responsive language, you have so many callbacks and such, you end up, so if you, instead of tabs, let's say you use 2 spaces per indent, you get part way down through and you're in a particular block of code, you've got like 16 spaces at the beginning of every line because you're that far down into the weeds on being responsive. It just, it gets ugly sometimes. JavaScript can really get to be a pain. And I saw some of that in Rust just now. So there's that. Let's get on to command line tips. We've got Ken. Ken is up first. Ken, what is your command line tip for today?
Well, my command line tip is last. And that's the command, last. Even if you aren't a system administrator, you may still want to display a list of all users logged in and out of your computers or servers. This is what last does by searching back through the root/var/log-wtmp file by default. There's a flag so you can choose other logs to search through, but if you type in last all by itself at the screen and press enter, it's going to give you that list. You may want to pipe that through less to make it easier to move around with it. And that way you can, when you pipe it into less, you'll start at the very beginning. For those of y'all watching the video, y'all have seen that I've just done that. And you'll see that the very first item on the screen has the username, Then the second column has the terminal that you're coming in on, as well as its IP address, and then the date and times that it started and stopped, and how long it ran. Now you'll see that one ran for 8 seconds. Right below it is the one I'm actually using to do the command on, and that shows that I'm on sudo terminal service 1, and that's showing you the IP address for my Chromebook, because this is going into my ThinkPad.
Neat.
Now, I'm going to go ahead and ThinkPad. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to another SSH that I've got set up on my Think Center. And I'm going to show you using the -A, which what that does is it moves the IP address all the way to the last column. So it makes it easier to check that. Now, there's also a -D that you can use that if you've got your IPs being resolved to a host name, would actually change that so it gave the host name. I don't have that being resolved on my systems. But this is the Think Center that I'm using as a file server. It shows all the users that have logged in and out. Now, you'll notice if you're looking at the video that it's only got 2 users. The username I use for myself and reboot. What's nice is with last, you can actually have it show just for one user. I'm going to go with reboot this time. So I would say last reboot. And then it goes, just shows all the times that the system rebooted. And the most recent time was back on the 9th of February for the file server. The 9th of February at 11:29, and it's been running since then. And it also, in this case, shows the kernel that it's using. The file server itself, since it's running Ubuntu Studio 20.04, is using 5.4.0-177.
Yeah, that is pretty nifty. I can see that being useful for kind of trying to jump in and troubleshoot a problem, because it's like, well, how long did it stay up with this kernel? But also, on a remote server, it's like, has somebody logged in here since the last time I was in? Let's check. Very useful.
Another option that you can use is -X. What that'll do is it'll show you shutdown and run levels.
A little drills into that just a little bit more on when it went up and down. Cool. All right. I like it. Jeff, you're up next, sir.
Yeah. So need to see your battery levels on your wireless devices in Ubuntu. Some of you are saying that's already there. In Ubuntu, you're probably telling me right now that you can use the experimental blues feature to get the battery power levels for your connected device. That's only partially true, though. Just like Apple, they have to be different. Normally, a device will report its battery status using the Bluetooth battery service, or BAS, but Apple AirPods instead share battery and model information using BLE advertising packets, and that's Bluetooth Low Energy Audio. In the show notes, there's a link for a Gnome shell extension AirPod battery meter, and it will give you the battery level for each AirPod left and right, along with the little case they come in. So there isn't really that much to say about it. You just connect the AirPods, pick how you want the display to show up, because you can have the battery amount on, there's a couple different options where you want it. And this also works for Beats devices, which is an Apple subsidiary, which I didn't know, but the link in the article in the show notes goes over how you install it. There's using the GNOME extension, and you can just click on it and it'll auto install, and you can give the extension a try and never get caught again with low battery issues on your audio device.
Cool. I may have the iPad, but I am going to resist the rest of the Apple lineup. I like my $40 Chinese name brand earpods from
My AirPods
Amazon.
even have my name engraved on them.
Fancy.
Nice.
Very, very, very bourgeois of you.
It was free. It didn't cost anymore.
Oh, okay.
I'll have to say I prefer the LG Tune Pros. I like it sitting on my neck when I'm not using it.
There you go. All right. Rob is up next with his fancy iPods.
I'm not using my AirPods today. Maybe next week. But my tip, it's not a command line tip. It is a GUI tip. So as we all discovered last week, or rediscovered, I should say, Flatpak is the best packaging option out there.
Yeah, that's
So-
what we concluded, right?
That's exactly what my browser test said. It was the fastest. So what we need is a great tool to manage the advanced aspects of Flatpak. The tool I am going to suggest today is called Warehouse. Warehouse can, of course, be found and installed from FlatHub. With Warehouse, you can view the vast amount of detailed information of each Flatpak you have installed, starting from the name, description, app ID, all the way to the active commit and the installed size. You can manage and see how much data and uninstalled Flatpak is left behind. And then in batches or alone, you can copy info, you can delete an app data, you can uninstall, all in batches or standalone by just in the trash can and deleting it. Install a Flatpak from a file rather than a repo, with options to install for once you do that. If you have the file and you install the file, it will ask you, do you want to install this for the entire system? So it's going to do it system-wide, or just for this user. So it's just going to do it in that user's area. You can manage Flatpak repos also, and much more. So if you are a Flatpak fan, check out Warehouse.
Warehouse. I am humored by their punnery there, and the fact that you installed it over Flatpak. It's a very eating your own dog food sort of thing.
All I know is I'm gone 1 week and Rob goes crazy.
Hey, I didn't say snaps.
That'd
just
be
did.
crazy. All right. So I had a fun adventure I went on this week, and the virtual machine that does backups for me and several of my customers ran out of disk space, and the underlying machine had plenty of disk space on it left. Just the VM itself, the /home directory on it where stuff actually gets stored, maxed out. And so I embarked upon the journey to expand that, and it was quite the journey. Indeed. So the way that you do this, and I would tell you the thing that made it extra complicated is it's an LVM, and it's XFS on top of an LVM. So it took probably an hour of fiddling around to try to finally get this done. And we're going to break it into a few steps. That way you can actually understand all of the steps. And to start with, I used QEMU-IMG, and that is the QEMU image manipulation tool. And when I say image, I don't mean like pictures, but image like disk image. In my case, I was using a .img, which is a raw disk image. Makes it a little easier to work with. And so you can do a QEMU-IMG info and then the name of your image, and it will tell you the size of it and all of that. And to resize the image itself, that is trivial. That is easy. QEMU-IMG space resize, and then I had to tell it it's raw, so -F and then space raw. The name of the image, in my case, rel7.img, and then the new size, or you could tell it, I want you to grow it by this amount. So I said +1 capital T. I wanted it to be 1 terabyte bigger. I was doubling it from 1 terabyte to 2. It did that. It did that pretty quickly. And so then you look at it and go, yay, it's 2 terabytes big. But we're not done yet, because when it comes to one of these images and the drive inside of it, it is a multi-layered onion. It is such a pain because you have to do all the layers in the right order. And if you mess any of them up, you're toast. You're done. You have big problems. So the next step is to mount the image on a loop device so that you can actually get to it as if it were a physical disk. And the easy way to do that is LO setup for loop setup. And then you tell it which of the loop devices you want it to use. And so in this case, it's just /dev/loop0, and then the name of the image. And that will essentially mount this .img as loop0. And so then you can see it as if it were a mounted disk, but not with the partitions mounted, just the disk itself. And that's where we're going to leave this tip. We're going to come back to it next week for more of the juicy / painful details of how you do this, because it was a trip. But now you know, to start at least.
So that was the first layer.
Yes, that was the first layer of the onion. The outside .img, we have grown that. But the partition inside of that is still small. So,
you know, in the back channel, like earlier, I told you I've already had to go through this.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did my segment on the show, mine was actually more of a Chat GPT segment, I think.
Yep.
So I didn't really get too deep into it.
We're gonna get into the weeds.
The thing is, when I did it that time, that wasn't the last time I've had to do it. I ran into the same problem several months later, and I could not remember how to do it. I went back to Chat GPT again, but I knew the right question exactly, and I got the right answer right away. But
cool.
You won't remember next time.
I have found, no joke, I have found that when I come across one of those problems, I need to either document it here or go write a Hackaday article about it. And I cannot tell you how many times that I have gone Googling for something, and it's like, I know how to do this, but I can't bring to mind the exact steps. Oh, hey, look, there's a Hackaday article. Oh, I wrote this Hackaday article.
Well, I'll
use my notes.
Actually, the nice thing about ChatGPT is it saves all of your queries, so I could go back to that. But it was still not nice and clean. I have a nice and clean how-to written up, so I guess I better post that before you get your Hackaday app.
Yeah. Go post it somewhere. It'd be super useful. I may steal parts of it for this series.
That's why I have a notes file in my home directory, just to keep track of all these. Oh yeah, I do this once a year. And
The problem with the notes file, though, is that when you go Googling for it because you've forgotten it was in your notes file, Google's not going to be able to find it there.
That's the first place I always check is the notes file.
Okay.
It's fun to figure out every time, I think.
It depends upon what you're figuring out. Some things are fun. Some things are...
Google's not a command line terminal command.
That's
find
also,
is.
That's also true. That is also true. I bet you there's a way. I bet you there's a way to search Google from the command line. I mean, obviously you can pull up the Lynx browser or what have you and do it that way, but I bet you there's a way to search Google from the command line.
Or I bet you can use the
with
warp.
curl.
Or I bet you can just use the warp terminal and ask warp how to resize your LVM.
Yeah, no, you start typing and it'll send your keystrokes up to the LLM automatically, and it'll just correct them as you type. That sounds dystopian and terrifying is what that sounds. Oh,
dangerous.
If I find it
because you'll get in the habit of mistyping everything.
Yeah.
I mistype everything anyway.
Jeff?
If I remember, I'll have a command line tip that might help.
All right, there we go. Okay, it has been fun, but it is late. Let the guys get a last word in. We'll go from left to right on my radio dial, and that's starting with Jeff. What do you have for us?
I just want to say thank you for everybody that's listening and everybody that's in the Discord interacting with us. And I don't have anything other than a little bit of poetry. Windows NT crashed. I am the blue screen of death. No one hears your screams. Have a good week, everybody.
And the blue screen of death. Rob, you're next.
All right, let's try a poem. I'm going to make this up here.
Oh,
The
no.
router down the hall, the switch in the bathroom. Time to do dynamic refresh. Gnome goes vroom vroom.
Stick to your day job.
Come to robertpcampbell.com and you can find links to my LinkedIn and my Mastodon that I can't point at because my camera cuts off there, but my Mastodon, or donate a copy there. robertpcampbell.com. Come connect with me.
All right. And Ken.
Well, while reviewing the various articles this week, this headline that you see in the Indie Notes caught my attention. The last digitally free nation on Earth. I thought you might also enjoy this opinion piece. Take the time to read it. Leave us feedback on what you think, either in our open
In the Discord or on Twitter and all of the places. Yes, I will say I did briefly take a look at that article, and it is much less political than you would think and much more Linux oriented than you would think. Actually worth taking a look at. It is pretty interesting. So, all right. Thank you to you guys, of course. Thank you to you guys in the chat room and Discord that caught up with us live. We sure appreciate that. And to everyone that watches us on the download inside Club Twit and out, we do sure appreciate you as well. And we will see you next week on the Untitled Linux Show. Hey, did you enjoy the show but wish you could be just a little bit more plugged into it? Want to chat with us on Discord live while the show is being made? See our bright and smiling faces rather than being stuck with audio only? You need to check out Club Twit. At only $7 a month, it is a real steal. You get access to the Club Twit Discord, all of the shows ad-free, video for this show, and more. Goodness, it's worth it. Twit.tv/ClubTwit. Go check it out.